how do we become a rebel when we're good children growing up?
hmm I think that's a really good question because, there's different reasons why people might be rebellious, but I think that typically when children are obedient up to a certain point, a lot of times it could come from a childhood background of just, that's very conservative or maybe controlled by the parents. Children just naturally have this need to explore the world, right? Like they have this natural curiosity. It's like, oh, what's that? What's that?
Yeah.
Because that's their way of learning about the world. And parents, while their job is to protect their children, their job is also to help their children make sense of things that happen versus just prevent their children from being exposed to danger.
How do you some of the signs of
And
being a
when
parent
we're
and
able
especially
to
affecting
expose our
behavior?
children
Especially
to
with
things prohibitive or punish them in some sort of way that they're not
One of them is
again, as children,
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You are listening to Don't Be Afraid to Talk podcast with James. I believe if we are going to affect change, we must go back to the basic, which for me, in essence, is conversations. Talking and listening is key for growth, and I hope our stories will bring us together and we can draw inspiration from each other. Conversation will include topics such as mental and physical health, trauma and its effect, suicidal thoughts, recovery, and well-being. We will continue to raise awareness and offer a different perspective, a mindset or an idea that could inspire you to take charge of your well-being and to grow as a human being. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Ask the Therapist. Today I'm joined by Dr. Betsy, and we're going to be talking about all things in relation to the wounded child. If you are listening, have an open mind, and we hope you can learn something from this episode. Dr. Betsy, how are you? Oh my God, I'm so warm.
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
God, sorry, I'm so warm. Jesus Christ. Um, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I am from Los Angeles, California. I know that you're all the way on the other side of the world,
In
and
Ireland, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And I was able to look, look up some of your other podcast episodes, and I noticed that a lot of the people that you've worked with are, in Europe, and so
Yeah, that's
I was
great.
kind of happy. I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I get to.
Yeah, I like
Uh-huh.
to expand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I specialize in self-esteem and relationships, healthy relationships. I've been doing this, I would say, like specializing in these two areas, I would say for about 6, 7 years now.
Mm.
Um, Earlier in my career, I was like just trying so many different things. I think before I went to grad school, I thought I wanted to work with the Chinese community because my background is Chinese. I thought I wanted to work with adolescents because my own experiences growing up as a Chinese adolescent coming from a conservative family, I thought like, you know what, I could probably do some good. I can be helpful in,
Mm.
with that community and it help kind of bridge the gap between older generations and younger generations. And I would say that it's interesting because now that I think about it, I think I've kind of come full circle. Like I don't necessarily work with adolescents. However, I do work with a lot of young people, young adults that do kind of struggle
Mm.
with their Asian identity, their Asian American identity. And the way I got into relationships was there was some point in my career where I was working with clients, and there were just things that I realized like, wow, like every single client I work with, they're in the underlying a lot of their difficulties is that their relationships with other
Mm.
people are off. They don't know how to relate. They don't know how to express their feelings in relationships. And a lot of times that that traces back to their childhood relationships with their caregivers. So that kind of sparked my interest in learning more about relationships, how to help people have healthy ones. And then in talking about relationships, I think that it also relates very much to our relationships with ourselves as well. How do we treat ourselves? How do we view ourselves? What role do we assume that we play in the world? And how do we view ourselves in a positive or negative light? So I would generally say that, yeah, I work with relationships with the self and others.
Yeah.
I don't work with couples. I think that that's one thing that a lot of people
You don't work with
are sometimes
couples?
confused about. No, I don't work with couples at all. In fact, I turn down a lot of couples just because that's not really where my specialty
Mm.
is. I think that couples therapy is very different from individual therapy, and so for me, it's like I want to stick to what I know, and then if somebody needs help with their with their relationship, then I'll leave that to
Mm.
a couples therapist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because when you say like relationship, you just kind of assume it's couples relationship as well, but it's more relationship with yourself and others, but not as a couple.
Yeah.
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 So the way I like to explain to people is that, for instance, like relationships with others is not just romantic relationships, it's family relationships, it's
Mm.
friendships, it's professional relationships, relationship with a boss. So, for me, how I work with people is I help them understand certain patterns that they might be having in their relationships, and to help them develop healthier ways of resolving conflicts, healthier ways of getting their needs met in relationships, and maybe even recognizing sometimes, is this even a healthy relationship to begin with?
Mm.
Is this what I want for myself? So yeah, just basically anything relationship, as long as you don't bring the other person in.
Yeah.
I help you deal with the other person,
Yeah.
but I help you
Yeah.
individually to
Yeah.
deal with the
Don't
other
bring them
person.
into the room.
Right.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Great. Before we get going, we're just going to play a quick game, 1 for 1. I'll
Okay.
give you a word and you say the first thing that comes to your mind. Sorry. Yes, these are just random words, 5. So the first
Okay.
one is carrot.
Carrot. Rabbit. My dad's a rabbit in the Chinese horoscope, so rabbit.
Yellow.
Oh, submarine.
Speedboat.
Oh, my husband.
Uh,
I can explain these actually, but yeah, I kind of like this.
yoga.
Oh man, hot, sweaty.
And last one is tangerines.
Chinese culture.
Yeah, tangerines. Yeah. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I give a little background on
Yeah,
that?
I was thinking like the fruit, but yeah.
Oh, what were you referring to when you said
The
tangerine?
fruit is
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was thinking the fruit too.
okay. The
The reason
background.
why I say Chinese
Yeah,
culture
yeah.
is because my mom, she's Buddhist, and so growing up, like every single week she would go to the market and purchase fruits that she would put on a plate and kind of offer to the ancestors, and tangerines is one of the fruits that she used to always buy, and I never really liked it, but she always bought it. So every time I think of tangerine, I think of like tangerines stacked on a plate that my mom would
Yeah.
offer to ancestors. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that would do it. Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant. And was that? Yeah, yeah. Sorry, that's 5 words. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. Um. Okay, I'm just gonna have a drink of water. Sorry, my water's on this side in case I'm turning around.
No worries.
And my tablet is here for the question. So we get going. So first question. Hi Betsy, I often struggle. Sorry, let me start again. Hi Betsy, I often struggle to trust people in a relationship, but I trust other people that I meet. Why is that happening?
So I'm assuming that what they mean by trust people in a
Yeah.
relationship is that,
So
they struggle to trust people in a romantic
yeah,
relationship.
yeah. So this is where I don't really. I find it hard to trust my partner, but I trust everyone else outside. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So this tends to happen because in romantic relationships, it tends to elicit a stronger attachment response than platonic relationships. And so because of the nature of a romantic relationship is so intimate, it kind of reminds our mind and body of like earlier familial relationships. Because in both romantic relationships and family relationships, what we're really looking for is we're looking to bond with the person, we're looking to establish a certain level of security. And so, therefore, in both of these types of relationships, we tend to kind of use the same kinds of methods, from our early intimate relationships in our adult relationships to get those needs met.
Mm,
So, for instance, if as a child, the way that I needed to get attention from my parents was by maybe being rebellious or maybe crying very loud, then as adults, what we also do is like, okay, in order to get this person to give me the attention and the attachment that I crave from them, I'm going to use the same methods. So the reason why we tend to, like let's say struggle to trust people in a romantic relationship is maybe because we, failed to trust our caregivers
mm,
to be able to meet our needs. Like let's just say that as a child, let's say crying, for instance,
mm.
right? Like maybe crying wasn't something that was okay, and it felt like, it felt like when we did cry that our parents wouldn't give us attention, they wouldn't care about our needs. As adults, we might struggle to trust that our parents, that are not parents, but as adults we might struggle to trust that our partners are going to be there for us if we actually show them our feelings. And so that's just an example of, why in our romantic relationships we might sometimes approach those in a different way than we do in friendships or other kinds of relationships.
Mm. That's all obviously done at subconscious level. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like they, like you might want to trust them, but deep down you don't really want to trust them. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of elicits that similar response,
Mm,
right? It's like you're just not really sure. And the goal really, even though it might seem like we don't trust the person, or sometimes it might even look like we're distancing ourselves from the
mm.
person, but in the end of the day, the goal really is to try to get closer to the person, right? So like when for instance we might push away somebody, or we might not be honest about our feelings about certain things, it's because we believe that our feelings are going to drive the person away. So by not talking about our feelings, we believe that, okay, that's going to preserve the relationship. So yeah, it's a lot of similarities between our childhood caregiver relationships and our romantic ones in adulthood.
Mm. This sounds like all my relationships, but no. Let's go. um yeah, sorry, question number 2. Sorry, forget that. So sorry, question number 2. Becoming rebellious teen or adult, how do we become a rebel when when we're good children growing up?
hmm I think that's a really good question because, there's different reasons why people might be rebellious, but I think that typically when children are obedient up to a certain point, a lot of times it could come from a childhood background of just, that's very conservative or maybe controlled by the parents. Children just naturally have this need to explore the world, right? Like they have this natural curiosity. It's like, oh, what's that? What's that?
Yeah.
Because that's their way of learning about the world. And parents, while their job is to protect their children, their job is also to help their children make sense of things that happen versus just prevent their children from being exposed to danger. And so as a result, by the time these children get to a certain age, they're very limited in their experiences. They're limited in their knowledge about the world. They might be limited in their emotions and their feelings. So for instance, if a child was raised to be very, very responsible, maybe it felt good for them to be responsible as a child, but then but maybe their parents didn't give them a lot of space to experience joy, or, just sometimes like sit there and be lazy and watch TV. So perhaps once these children grow up and they start to be exposed to more, they start to develop a little bit more freedom and independence, they start to discover feelings, experiences that they're just, again, naturally curious about. Yet at the same time, they don't feel like they can go to their parents to learn about these things because their parents never taught them. And maybe their parents were controlling or authoritarian. So what that would do is it would discourage the children from going to their parents. And, what they would do instead is gravitate towards other people that are more accepting of certain behaviors, such as like drugs and alcohol, or, just generally doing things that were not allowed as children. Oftentimes what that can do is it causes friction between the children and the parents, which can eventually create even more problems and causing the child to further distance themselves from the parents. So that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it could just simply be that the children are learning more things and doing things that were not okay by the parents, even though it's not necessarily bad. So sometimes the children aren't even rebellious. This kind of makes me think of my own experience growing up. When I was in college, I was exposed to a lot of different experiences that I had never had the opportunity to learn about. And so I would go out late at night till 3 a.m, and I would try alcohol when I was underage. And I remembered feeling like such a bad kid for it. I was like, oh my God, I'm so rebellious. But yeah, I remember one day, one of my roommates, she's like, "You're not rebellious." I was like, "Why am I not rebellious?" She's like, "You're in college, you're, getting your good grades, you're working towards graduation. Like, how are you rebellious?" And I thought about it, I was like, wow, I just called myself rebellious because I was doing things that
Was
I knew
deemed.
my mom wouldn't. Yeah, yeah. And so I think that, when it comes to, I guess, labeling something as rebellious, it's also, we need to, make sure that we pay attention to the context as well. Is like, is this actually rebellious behavior, or is it just something that our parents wouldn't have been okay with? Is it something that would have caused conflict between you and your parents, even though, all you're trying to do is just learn more about the world?
Yeah, yeah. And do you think, this is not one of the questions, do you think when, say, like that a teenager started discovering new things, and because the way they were brought up, they were not allowed to express certain things. So when they become 16, they start discovering, oh, we can do this, we can do that. So obviously they don't have to trust to tell their parent because they feel like they're going to be smacked or whatever. So can that relationship be repaired?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that as children, well, actually, I don't want to make that blanket statement, in order to somehow suggest to everyone that every single parent relationship with their child can be repaired in adulthood. However, based on my work, based on my observation, there are many, many things that we can do to heal not just ourselves, but our relationship with our parents. I think as children, our parents are so, so important to us, that our parents, they basically represent the world, meaning that, when we're kids, we don't look at our parents as just another human being. We don't look at our parents like values and the things that they
Yeah.
teach us as, oh, that's just what my mom thinks. That's just what my dad thinks. We look at what they have to say as representative of the world, right? Like that's a truth about life. And so what ends up happening when we're children is that we start to believe our parents, everything that they say, and that becomes part of our personality and part of how we view the world. So by the time we hit adolescence, sometimes it could cause us to have that natural curiosity, but then at the same time, also question that natural curiosity as well, right? So, for instance, if you're a kid and you really liked to climb on things all the time, and every single time your parents screamed at you for climbing on things because they didn't want you to get hurt, then the message that you would get as a child is, oh, these things that I want to do, these natural things that I want to do are really bad. So don't trust that little part of you on the inside that says, hey, go do
Yeah,
this
do
or
that.
try
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time we become adolescents, by the time we become adults, what ends up happening is that we don't really trust our inner instincts. And we have this like internal conflict of like, oh, should I do that? Should I
Mm.
not do that? Well, this is what my parents would have said, but I really still want this and I need this, and sometimes that can even lead to feelings of shame, right? Like I must be a bad kid because I want to do all these things that, is generally not okay. And again, I'm going to say like our assumption is that it's generally not okay with the world, when in reality, it just wasn't okay with our parents.
Mm.
So I think as adults, a really big part of healing is to be able to start recognizing our parents as flawed human beings. Being able to recognize that, okay, these messages that I received, it doesn't mean they're all wrong or all bad. But we get to start recognizing, okay, my parents are just flawed human beings like I am. And what are some values that I do want to take with me? What are some values and beliefs and messages that I received from them that I don't agree with? And how can I guess, create my own perspective of the
Yeah.
world, my own way of dealing with the world. Yeah, so I think that a lot of times once we can get to that point of recognizing that our parents are imperfect
Yeah.
and they don't know everything, a lot of times that allows us to start to develop a more compassionate relationship with them, or maybe even more forgiving. This is not to say again that every single relationship should or can get there.
Yeah. 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 Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Next question. Why do I always feel guilty of my progress, regardless of how great things are? Sorry, let me start again. What is wrong? Can't read. Why do I always feel guilty of my progress, regardless of how great things may be?
So the first thing that comes up to me with this question is I kind of can relate to that too. Um, I I think of survivor guilt. So if I can maybe explain a little bit of, I guess, like my
Mm,
experience with like feeling guilty of progress and
mm,
guilty of achievements. My parents were immigrants here, here in the United States. They came in their late 20s, early 30s with nothing. And my both of my parents, they worked really really hard to be able to build up to the life that they have today, and they ended up having five children that are able to take care of themselves and are successful. And I think that where my survivor guilt comes from sometimes is that growing up watching my parents struggle as much as they did, it really it made me feel bad. And I was taught to not overspend. I was taught to not ask for a lot. So now as an adult, my life is just so much better because of
mm,
them. I was able to go to school. I had a generally safe family home environment. And and now I am a psychologist in my own right, and able to take care of myself and afford to buy things that my parents couldn't afford when I was growing up. So sometimes it's, while I'm able to recognize my achievements and my progress, at the same time, there's this part of me that feels a little bit bad.
Mm.
Like I look at my parents and sometimes I wish like that they could live the life that I live. And so it's interesting because my parents don't even care to live the life that I
No.
live. So like for example, yeah, for me, one thing that I've learned is I'm willing to spend money on self-care, meaning that I pay to see a therapist when I need. I pay to go see a chiropractor when I need. I worked with an acupuncturist. So I'm willing to pay money to be able to feel good and take care of me. And I'm lucky because I don't have any children. So I am able to kind of meet those kinds of needs for myself. And so sometimes when I talk to my parents and I see them still living a very frugal lifestyle, I feel really bad about it. And I try to push them to spend more money. It's
Yeah.
like, you know what, you guys work so hard and you've got all this money. Like, like spend
Do
it,
something.
live
Yeah.
a better life for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I realized that they don't even want that, so I think that, what I kind of realize is that sometimes this guilt is really my own thing. And it's not really based on a reality that my
Mm.
parents, want a different life. So yeah, like I guess like that's what it reminded me of when you were when you asked like the guilt of your progress, regardless of how great things might be.
Mm. Mm. So you obviously creating ideas in your head that's not even real. Like they're happy to do what they want to do, but you feel like
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that, maybe to explain it a little bit further is like as a child, I had this sense of guilt. I had this sense of wanting to take care of my parents. So, like for instance, every time, for me, I had two older sisters, and a younger sister and a younger brother. But when I was the youngest, I remembered that my sisters would get like clothes when we would go shopping. And for me, I always kind of ended up with the hand-me-downs. And I hated that because it's like I had two older sisters. And so they always got to go shopping and buy what they wanted. And then when I wanted something, my mom would be like, oh, you're going to fit your sister's
yeah,
clothes
just
pretty
take that
soon.
one.
So you can
Yeah.
just have that. But it's like,
Yeah.
right. And I hated it because I had two sets of clothes that I had to go through before I could get my own stuff. And the thing that the message that was always sent to me was that, we don't have that much money and we need to learn how to save. If I ever wanted, let's say to buy Christmas presents for friends, right? Like I would always have to buy like the really, really cheap ones. And so that made me conscious about money and conscious of taking care of my parents. It wasn't intentional by my parents. I don't think that they meant for me to take care of them,
No.
but the message that I received definitely was like, we don't have that much. And so you need to be more careful about the things that you want. And I think that, because that message was never corrected for me growing up, that's why now as an adult, I still kind of have that thought sometimes whenever I want to take care of myself is that, are you thinking about your parents before you spend money? Are you
Yeah.
thinking about other people before you spend money?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for children as well, because they personalize things. If something isn't explained to them, they just think it's something that like it's their fault or something. You know.
Yeah, and that's the thing with
It's,
kids is that they're very egocentric, right? Like they have no concept of empathy when they're very young. They have no concept of, the fact that other people have their own experiences. And so, when mom and dad get upset and get in an argument, the children aren't able to say like, oh, dad must have been in a bad mood
mm,
today, or mom must have been hurt by dad, saying that thing to her, or whatever. Children have no concept of that. So the only way that they can make sense of the world is by what they've been exposed to so far. And what they've been exposed to so far is just their own personal experiences and their relationships with their parents. Um, that's why, like, I really like what you said right now. It's like that's why it's so important for parents to help children make sense of things that are happening, to explain things to kids. So, for example, when two parents are engaged in a conflict, it's really important to sit the kids down and say, "This has nothing to do with you."
Yeah.
Like sometimes mommy and daddy are just not gonna agree on things, but this is not your fault. And kids have a tendency to believe their parents,
Mm.
right? Because again, their
Yeah.
parents are, the boss of the world.
Mm.
And so when parents are able to kind of reassure their kids, then the kids are less likely to feel responsible for things that are happening around them.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Move on to my next question. Sorry. Okay, so this one, okay, I have to explain this question. So, why do we do what was done to us? So, an example is, say, for example, someone that was beaten by their father. When they have a child, they'll probably do the same to their child as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
why does that happen when you used to be the one getting beaten, now you're the one inflicting the pain? So, is that because
Yeah.
we learned that's the only way to parent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oftentimes that is the case. I think that we tend to repeat behaviors that we're familiar with.
Mm.
And, the thing is that as children, the ways that our parents treat us, it affects the children in multiple ways. One is that the children internalize the way that their parents treat them. So, for instance, when you're talking about an abusive parent, um, when a child is constantly being abused either emotionally or physically or maybe even sexually, what ends up happening is that again they are egocentric, so the children internalize that as there must be something wrong with me. I did something to deserve that.
Mm.
And especially when the parents are overreactive, when the parents are unpredictable, that becomes even more confusing and shameful for the children because it's like, okay, like I guess that there's just something generally wrong with me. It's not that I do things wrong, it's that I'm just not a very worthy person. I'm not valuable.
Mm.
And so that's one way that children internalize their parents' treatment of them. The second way that the parents can affect the children is that they model certain behaviors on how to respond to these types of situations. So, for instance, if a child only learned that, let's say both mom and dad are very abusive, then what happens is that they only learn that, oh, that's how you respond when you're angry,
Mm.
right? Like whenever somebody does something wrong, that's how you're supposed to show your emotion, and that's how you get the person to stop doing whatever it is that they're doing wrong, right? So we learn that, like, okay, like that's how we respond to things. The goal over time is to be able to learn new ways to respond to stimuli, because by continuing to hurt other people, it's not helping us preserve bonds
Mm.
that we really actually want. And so that's why it's really important that we recognize these kinds of patterns that are not helpful, to the kinds of healthy relationships that we want to be in, and learn how to change our responses.
Mm. Yeah, especially with when it comes down to like physical abuse. I know like generations now is getting better, but like when you talk 50s and 60s, it was pretty much that's how you train your child, for example. and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
when you grow up, you think, okay, this is how it was done, so this is what I'll do as well. There wasn't much awareness around child abuse, so it was considered normal. So
Yeah,
unfortunately, yeah.
yeah. And I think that another thing that is really important, about just parental abuse of their children is that oftentimes it's justified as punishment, but it's really a loss of temper. I don't want to say like 100% of the time that it's a loss of temper, but that's why, using any kind of, capital punishment is really problematic, because when parents lose their temper and they don't know how to contain these very strong
Mm.
emotions that they have, they tend to take that energy out on their children. And so, maybe they're annoyed that their children won't stop making sounds when they're trying to rest. And rather than being able to communicate that to their children, because they never learned what effective communication or what effective parenting looks like, they might get upset,
Mm.
and and they'll lose their temper, and then they'll end up hitting their children. And sometimes, the more angry they are, the more likely that they'll hit their children even harder. So that's why hitting children can be very problematic, is that, research has shown that physical punishment actually doesn't really do anything. If anything, it actually causes more pain,
Mm.
emotional pain for the children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all it does. Yeah. Thank you. My next question. Hi, I remember not being able to express my anger growing up. Do you think this is why I find it hard to be happier?
That's a interesting question. I I guess that I can't necessarily say that not being able to express anger affects our ability to generally be happy. However, I know that not being able to express anger as a child can affect our ability to ever feel, I guess, like be intimate in relationships, emotionally intimate. And the reason for that is that emotional intimacy is achieved by being extremely vulnerable and authentic,
Mm.
right? Like, to be able to be known and seen. So one of the ways that I like to explain to my clients what vulnerability and intimacy is if I were to, let's say, remove my face, and you're able to look inside behind my face and look at my brain and look at how I think and look at, my feelings and just who I am as a person, and you still love me. That's what intimacy is. And you being able to see everything, that's vulnerability. And I think that in our lives, we always need at least one person in our lives that we feel truly, truly knows us. And when we know that somebody truly knows us and loves us and accepts us anyway, despite knowing all our flaws and knowing
Yeah.
everything about us, that leads to security, right? Is that like, okay, this person knows everything about me and they still love me. That means that I know that they have my back no matter what. That means that I know 10 years from now, this person is still going to be in my life.
Mm.
And that's what I think that humans need in order to be able to feel safe. That we need that sense of belonging. We're social animals. Um, and when we're unable to express our anger, if that was in any way prohibited, if we were punished for expressing anger, then what ends up happening is that there's this whole part of us that needs to be suppressed and hidden away from the world.
Mm.
And, again, as children, when our parents tell us it's not okay to express anger, and we believe that that is the will of the world,
Mm.
then as we get older, we're going to continue to operate in relationships as if it's not okay to express our anger. So you see, what ends up happening is that we're basically engaging in every single relationships, holding back this part of ourselves and never really allowing ourselves to be truly known and truly, accepted
Mm.
by anybody. So I do think that not being able to express our anger growing up leads to general loneliness. And, it's hard to ever feel truly fulfilled and truly at peace, because we're just constantly needing to suppress and withhold this one side of us.
So that if you're in a relationship and you kind of have that part holding back, like, you will obviously not really be. You'll be in a relationship, but you won't really be vulnerable in a relationship, because you have that part that you're afraid to. Well, you're not afraid. You learned not to not to show it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eh,
And I think anger is also such an interesting, it's a very special emotion because everybody experiences anger, no matter what anybody says, right? Like we all have that emotion of anger. But I think a lot of times people they they associate the emotion of anger with the behavior of aggression. And so I think that sometimes, people might even hold their own anger back because they never learned how to regulate or contain their emotions. Let's say they grew up in an environment with very emotionally volatile parents, and all they saw was like, oh, anger is explosive, anger
mm,
is dangerous, it hurts people, it's terrifying. So that might be another reason why we might want to hold back our anger as well. So really the goal to learning how to deal with anger is to find healthier ways to communicate the anger, to even understand sometimes, like, is what I'm feeling even anger? So especially growing up in an environment where, maybe the parents weren't very emotionally aware.
mm.
As a result, the parent might treat disappointment with anger. They might assume that frustration is anger. And so it's almost like growing up, then they only have three feelings, right? Happy, sad, and
Yeah, yeah.
angry. But that's clearly not the case. And so, that's another important thing that we need to do in order to learn how to deal with our anger in a better way.
Mm. Yeah, I can see, especially a lot of men, a lot of boys become adult men who can't express anger because, like, as a boy, if they're angry and they're crying, like, they'll be told, like, oh, don't cry and that kind of stuff and be brave. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And so it really, I mean, exactly what you're saying right now, right? Like, be brave.
yeah,
So don't be scared, don't worry, right?
mm,
Like, and so it's like just because a parent tells a child not to feel something, it doesn't mean they don't feel it. What they do is they just stop showing it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so what ends
yeah,
up happening is that those feelings just kind of stay within them. They don't know how to resolve them.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. My next question is: people used to say you are so mature for your age. Is this because I had no choice?
I generally think so.
Mm,
Um, I think that it's interesting because people that, I guess children that were praised for being mature, they almost wear that as a
mm,
badge of honor, right? It's like, oh, you're so obedient. You're such a good girl. You're such a good boy. You listen. And the thing is that children generally, they're again, they're curious, they're creative, they're trying to explore the world. So they are sometimes going to be all over the place. And so when you see a child who tends to be a little bit more mature for their age, what that means is that they've got this inner child that is being held back. So any curiosity of, again, going back to that example of any curiosity of wanting to
yeah,
go and climb that couch right there, if a child is yelled at or basically told, like, that's bad, you're not supposed to do that, and if they, let's say, want to go outside and play with all the rest of the kids, and the parents are like, no, that's dangerous. What ends up happening is that all of these parts of them where they're trying to get to know the world, where they want to be silly and laugh and play, it gets held back in in replacement. What they're expected to do is be responsible, be
mm,
that good kid. So a lot of times these are the parentified children, right? Parentified children are those children that were kind of expected to take on responsibilities that they just
ready
weren't
for, yeah,
developmentally ready for. Um, yeah, so it could be parentified in a way where they were expected to take care of their younger siblings. Maybe they were expected to take care of themselves growing up. the origins of some of these kinds of childhood environments could be parents that were always, very busy working. So sometimes it wasn't even intentional neglect. It was, out of necessity. Sometimes it could actually be neglectful parents, right? Like parents that maybe weren't ready to take care of a child and, would still go out and kind of take
Mm.
care of their own needs versus tending to their children. And another one, it could be authoritarian parents. So parents that really needed their children to kind of almost act like little
Yes.
adults. And so a lot of times these kids, they were praised for being these little adults. And the problem with this is that it could create certain struggles for these children. So what I see a lot with parentified children is that they have a tendency to kind of see themselves as socially awkward. And the reason for socially awkward, that they see themselves, I guess, as socially awkward is because, they're
Mm.
mature for their age, right? Like they see other children as bad, and and they tend to gravitate more towards adults because it feels good. I'm
Yeah.
being accepted by these adults. Yet at the same time, when they go to school, they don't know how to connect with their peers. They have a negative view of their peers. They're maybe even sometimes afraid of their peers, and so they really lack that kind of connection and engagement that they need in order to get along with people of their own age and
Yeah.
do things with people of their own age. Another result could be a difficulty balancing rest with work. So again, like these children, if they were parentified and they were overly responsible, then, for them, what felt good was gaining approval from their parents. So it was always about getting good grades,
Mm.
doing good work, helping around the house versus sitting down and
Yeah.
watching TV. Very rarely, like if they don't hear their parents say like, "Hey, you must be tired today. Why don't you
Mm.
go play?" If without that dialogue in their head, then these children might never know like when to stop, right? So like the more work their boss gives them, the more work they're going to try to do because there wasn't that dialogue of like, hey, you know what? It's enough.
Yeah.
That's too much work for you now. You need a
Yeah.
rest. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because for children growing up, like that would be their compliment is the approval they're looking for. But the long term effect, like you mentioned, that you might be socially awkward because people around you would behave a certain way, and you might almost start looking down on them because you think they're kind of childish. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
happens a lot, right? And the more that we have these negative judgments of our peers, the more we're distancing
Mm.
ourselves from our peers, right? It's like, I'm
Yeah.
better than them, I'm more responsible than them. And we're not able to connect with maybe the part of our peers that kind of have this inner child they are
Mm.
able to play out, right? So, like for instance, with my husband, I actually really love this part of him and I admire this part of him. If you look around my house, like we have nothing but
Yeah.
toys. Like he has, remote control cars. He has a drone. He has a scooter, just anything with wheels. And, and I realized that if you look around me, like everything is just like psychology books. And, so I think something that I really had to learn from my husband was I had to learn how to spend money and not feel bad about it. I had to learn how to sometimes spend money on
Mm.
taking care of me. So this kind of like relates back to what I was saying earlier is that, there was a lot of growth that had to happen. I had to be able to see that, yes, my sense of maturity was beneficial to our relationship, but I also needed to make room for
Yeah.
play as well. And I think that's why he and I balance
Yeah.
each
He
other
still
so
wants to keep
well.
playing,
Yeah.
which is good. Which is good.
Yeah.
Like they say, inside all of us, there's a child who's looking to play.
Mhm.
So keep that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too.
Sorry. Next question. Sorry. Why do I keep finding myself in a dysfunctional relationship?
So I think that this is kind of similar to what we were talking about before, is that we tend to repeat things that we're
Mm.
familiar with. And it's not actually an intentional thing. I think that a lot of times people assume that when we say that we repeat relationships or that we seek out people that look like our parents, like I think a lot of times there's this assumption that we're doing it on purpose and we're looking for somebody that that like treats us exactly like our parents. While that somewhat might be the case. So, like for instance, I was raised by a dad who had four girls, and they were finally able to get their
Yes,
boy at the
yes.
very end. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, they really wanted my brother because yeah, like they just wanted a boy. And but growing up, it was just me and my three sisters, and my dad is such a gentle soul when it comes to girls. Like, never raised his voice at us, always very present and caring. And if we cried, he would come comfort us. And he was just a very loyal and good person. And so for me, growing up, I think that it naturally would occur to me when I'm in a relationship and I'm being mistreated, it would naturally occur to me that like
Yes.
I don't like that, right? Like so if I was dating a person who would curse at me, um that would feel very
Yeah.
unfamiliar to me, and because my dad was never like that. And so I would be able to recognize I don't like this, and I don't want to be treated this way. That's not how I'm supposed to be treated by a man. The problem is that the opposite can also happen as well, is that when we don't know what it feels like to be cherished by somebody, and, when we grew up in an environment where we witnessed a lot of emotional or physical abuse, maybe even neglect, then as adults, it might not occur to us as red flags
Mm.
when we're treated in these similar ways. Right. So if we grew up with a father who was very verbally abusive, and we watched our mothers tolerate it, or maybe we learned how to tolerate it, and this could go for having an abusive mother and and a child as well. Then when we get older and somebody curses at us and mistreats us, we might assume like, okay,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
normal, right? And on top of that, we also know
Yeah.
how to
Yeah.
respond to it,
You know what to do
right?
with
Is
it.
that like, yeah, we watched
Mm.
our parents, right? So it's like, okay, my mom would just tolerate it. My mom would just justify it, and maybe she would fight with my dad, and then she'll forgive him right after, right? So like we witness these things and we learn like, oh, okay, like I have a solution for that. And so that's why, like, if we have a pattern of being in dysfunctional relationships, it's not intentional. It's just that we're so used to it
Mm.
and familiar with it that we might not recognize when something is good for us or not good for us. Um, I think that one thing that we also tend to do is we might reenact certain maladaptive patterns. So even if the relationship didn't necessarily start out as very dysfunctional, if we learned how to respond to certain things in a certain way, that could elicit certain responses
Yeah.
from our partners. So, for instance, if we were raised by a caregiver that was very dominant, then as adults, we might also learn how to dominate our partners. And when that happens, then it creates a cycle, where our partners are constantly trying to achieve their independence. They might, kind of, they might engage in dishonest behaviors because for them it felt like they needed they needed
Mm.
some freedom, and and we're trying
Yeah.
to take away their freedom, right? So it can kind of sometimes create these dynamics that are very unhealthy. Yeah, so just really learning how to recognize like what are these unhealthy patterns that I keep repeating in my relationships. How does that relate to the relationships that I experienced or observed growing up? And what can I do to make the changes so that I don't continue to
Yeah.
repeat these patterns?
Especially when it's like a dysfunctional relationship where, like we just say, boy meets girl. The boy is not a nice person. The girl stays with him and eventually realizes that. and then she'll find another one who's not really a nice person. It's just like a circle they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously because they're not aware of. They're just repeating what they know without taking a step back to see, like, why do I keep
Right.
finding these these madmen?
Yeah. Right. And then when they do find somebody that, that treats them well or is a nice person, it might not be
Yeah.
recognized by them as, oh, this is love, this is safe, because they've never experienced it before. And so for them, it might be like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't like the way that this person buys me flowers. I
It's
don't like
too-
the way that this person calls me when I get home at the end of the night, Yeah. And I think that learning how to recognize like what is healthy and caring behavior, what is, what does it look like for somebody to, truly love you, and how can I learn how to get in touch with, that that feeling of being loved and being taken care of. Like when we've never really experienced those feelings, or there were certain unhealthy things that helped us feel that way. So like, for instance, if growing up, the only way that you got love and attention was by doing exactly as your parents said, then as an adult, you might assume that, okay, I need to figure out what this person wants out of me, and I need to do exactly that in order to get love from them. The truth is that as humans, we're supposed to just be
Yeah.
lovable the way
Yeah.
that we are,
Without, yeah.
right? Like, yeah. And sure. And so we don't necessarily have to earn that love, but when we felt like we had to earn the love growing up, then as an adult, then we'll continue to, be really confused when somebody just gives us love
Yeah.
without doing anything. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that person keeps chasing me and I'm not even giving them anything. Like,
You
what's
get a bit
wrong with them?
suspicious. What's going on here? It's like,
Right. It's like, that's not right. Like this
yeah,
person must be
yeah.
weird. Like person must be a
You
loser,
fit into
right?
the
Yeah.
loser or weird category. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Brilliant. That's great. Do we have time to do the attachment stuff?
I actually, funny thing, I actually have another podcast
Yeah.
interview
That's what I
right
was just
after
thinking.
this.
It's like, it's the time.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. We covered plenty.
Mhm.
We covered plenty. And I have another question here, which is not related to that. What do you do for fun?
Ooh, what a good question. What do I do for fun? My gosh, fun. You got me there. Because
What? So the personal.
I was raised to be a parentified child. Everybody noticed. So I guess when we say fun, the thing that I think about is, what do I do in my spare time? Yeah. Because and the reason why I think that that's such an important distinction is because my husband, he does have fun, right? Like growing up, he got to explore, and he always tells me all these stories of like going on adventures, and and for me, when I think about my childhood, I mean, I don't want to necessarily say that I didn't really have fun, but it was very subdued. So I played a lot of house, with my siblings. We played teacher a lot. So kind of like serious, responsible kind of stuff. Not a whole lot of like going out and, adventure and stuff like that. But one of the things that I guess does help me tap into, I guess, that fun part sometimes is, I used to like roller coasters. I do kind of like things that are thrilling. So for example, it's funny because I can't swim, but my husband and I, every time we visit like a beach kind of city for vacation, we always look for these these tours, these boat trips that go really,
The
really
speedboat.
fast. And they're very, very dangerous. And he's always like, yeah, like a speedboat. And he's like, I don't understand. He's like, you can't swim. How are you so brave? I was like, well, it's because you're here. Like, that's literally the reason why I feel comfortable
Yeah.
going out to sea on these like really bumpy speedboats going 35 miles per hour. Is because I feel safe and I feel secure that he's going to jump in to save me. So I guess in a way, that continues to go to show like what security really is about, right? It's like just being able to trust that this person has your back. But yeah, like what I like to sometimes do for fun is kind of sometimes doing these things that are a little bit scary for me that
Yeah.
I've never really done before. That's how I kind of tap into fun. But aside from that, what I do in my spare time is I love running. So just 2 days ago, I ran a half marathon in
Oh,
Las
cool.
Vegas, and that was I
Yeah.
really, really love that. Yeah, like that brings me back to my high school days because I used to run track and cross country.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I like running. I like just kind of walking around like nice neighborhoods with my husband. Like I like walking around like beach cities and things like that. So just more
Yeah.
relaxing kind of
No,
thing.
that's great. That's great. No, I always like to know, like, because you, like, your profession, because it's so, I use the word serious, you don't really think that you guys have fun, but it's nice to know. Oh.
Aw, cute.
No.
I can definitely agree with that. And the nice thing though is that I've had a lot of a lot of people tell me that they like my, I guess, bounciness. And I guess that's one of the things I've always liked about myself is that I do have a sense
Yeah.
of humor. I do like to joke with people a lot. I am generally a people person. Sometimes when I am around people, I can be a people person, but when I'm not around people, then I generally like to just kind of be by myself and and rest. But yeah, I mean, I guess I
Yeah.
could have a fun
Brilliant.
side too.
Brilliant. And my last question is, where are you online? What's the name of your website and Instagram?
So my website is www.drbetsychung.com. And if anybody's interested in following me on Instagram, I talk a lot about healthy relationships and self-esteem. My Instagram handle is Love Always Dr. Betsy.
Sweet. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm
Thank
just gonna
you.
stop the recording. Yeah, it's just the introduction that gets me. So take one. Okay. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a quick review on my Facebook page, Don't Be Afraid to Talk, or DM me on Instagram. The show notes will include all of the relevant links from today's episode. If you haven't already, please download, leave a rating, and share with your friends. You might just reach that person who needs to hear this message. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I am James Lumumba, signing off with gratitude.